How can we make sense of, and what should we do about, rules? That's this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. Hey everybody, welcome back. Thank you as always for tuning in. Great to see you here. This week I want to talk about the role of rules in our Agile practice, in our leader development. But first, let's take a moment to remember why we're here. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There's so many resources out there about what you need to do to be agile, but we focus on who you need to become in order to lead teams. So let's hammer down those fundamentals to create a unique and unstoppable force in this industry. And remember, if this helps you, tell your friends. As you may know, I've begun an educational movement of sorts. I've created a learning experience that is immersive, intensive, year-long, exhaustive, all about how to become a badass agile style leader. What we're doing in the program is already changing lives 30 days in. And if you want to hear more about it, I encourage you to reach out. But one of the things that we're focused on is building that elite tribe that we've been talking about on the podcast for so long now. And one of the questions that I'm obsessed with is how do we create eliteness, high performance, and excellence, world-class leaders when we work for clients or in environments where we're not allowed to, meaning we don't have the authority to or the influence to set the bar high and enforce it. It's a challenging question. Put another way, how do we motivate individual human beings to be at their best at all times? Well, one of the ways we try to go about it is to create rules. That is to say, we try to enforce goodness through force. Our society is obsessed with setting rules and worshiping rules. But here's the deal. Rules are a form of force. They're like commandments. Thou shalt not, never and always. Those absolute black and white statements not only don't sit well with us as free-thinking individuals, they're also not very agile, and they're not very modern. More and more, we're trying to honor the individual. We're trying to respect individual values and choices, and yet we continue to try to motivate people with sticks. I was reading some ancient philosophy a few days ago, and there's this great metaphor that basically said, where battle occurs, the earth is scorched and nothing can grow. And it got me to thinking that force is a necessary condition for resistance. If you're wondering why people push back against change, if you're wondering why people push back against Agile, or if you're wondering why people push back against your leadership, against your prescriptions or your coaching, it's probably because they feel like it's being forced on them. In my opinion and in my experience, absolutes don't work. What we need to get good at is inspecting the specific and current situation, inspecting the individual mindsets, attitudes, and backgrounds of everyone and everything involved, and trying to forge a unique way forward under those conditions. Your job as a leader, your job as a coach, is not to run scripts with people, but rather to understand the uniqueness of your current team and their objectives, and to forge a way forward based on your experience and based on your know-how. But when you either create rules or are bound by rules, you're going to struggle, because there's essentially two kinds of people. People who accept and depend on rules in order to make their daily decisions, or those who outright reject rules and authority. Now, ideally, you want to live in a space in between those two, but let's break that down. If you absolutely need rules to make your daily decisions and to know the way forward, that's great if you're doing a repetitive, predictable job. But if you're expected to respond to a constantly changing landscape, and you can't break out of the box of those rules, that's going to hinder you in your creativity and in your overall effectiveness. You simply can't color outside the lines. But in this current age, isn't that exactly what we're being asked to do? To bring our unique personalities to the workplace and to the challenges? To bring our creativity to problem solving? To be more autonomous? How are you ever going to be able to trust your teams if they depend on rules and regulations to get by? We want to break rules, or at least bend them and test them. Now, the polar opposite is to reject rules. In my mind, that's a great badass attitude, but it has some limitations. There are times when rules are there for your safety or to enforce equality or rightness or goodness or justice. And so we have to be careful about how much we resist rules because of negative mindsets, the things that we fear. So I'd suggest that rejecting rules outright is less favorable than questioning rules, than testing them, see if we can poke holes in them. But as leaders, I'll go one further. I think we need to practice and get good at not creating absolutes at all. Here's an example. Let's imagine that we believe we must always do code reviews. That sounds like a rule. And it is. And as a rule, it's not a bad one. Where you would obviously go wrong is insisting on code reviews in every imaginable situation. For example, some projects have no code. Here's an example of what I mean. There are some rules that work quite well in certain situations, but not every situation. Everything from code reviews to rigid meeting times, every prescription that you can think of will work in some situations, but in other situations, they're just not going to help you. They're too rigid. They actually constrain the team because they don't make sense for that kind of team. But I think the other problem with force and rules is that there's an element of compliance to them. People are way more likely to conform and comply with things that they themselves were complicit in creating. Here's what you need to do. Number 1, avoid absolutes. As a coach or leader, try to limit the number of times that you create strict rules or observances that the rest of the team simply has to accept and follow. Instead, move straight to step number 2. Allow the team to forge agreements and creeds of their own. What's that mean? Ask the members of the team what rules they want to be held accountable to. Let them do it democratically. Let them brainstorm and vote and agree and refine and test their own rules for themselves. If you think about it, a leader's job is not to set rules and standards of behavior and operating procedures for the whole team, but to lead people into their own, creating their highest performance by finding their own rhythms, by choosing what they need to be held accountable to. In some cases, teams will agree to things that are so fundamental that they don't even need to document the rule or check in to see if it's being upheld. These are standards that are already inherent in the culture or within the individuals that make up the team. And by not stating that rule and checking to see if it's being followed, you simplify the playing field. There's less status checking, less reviewing, less reporting, and less criticizing and judging. And most importantly, guys, if we're not allowing teams to use their best judgment and wisdom to figure out what standards they want to be held to, I don't believe we're really trusting teams, do you? So next time you're starting fresh with a brand new team, this is a great way to level up and modernize your leadership style. But if you're already in flight with an existing team, it's a perfect time to check your rules and regulations. Do we have too many? Are they serving us? Are they creating a dictatorial rather than democratic environment? Is this creating top-down, bossy-style leadership that's hurting the team and building fences and trust rather than tearing them down? All right, guys, bring this back to your practice this week and let me know how it goes. Thank you as always for tuning in. You can check me out at badassagile.com or find me on Twitter at badass_agile. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, stay badass.